On a night buried in snow, a billionaire opened his door to a freezing child who whispered, "Please don't let me die." That single knock shattered his solitude forever. What followed wasn't a rescue story. It was a choice that changed two broken lives and the meaning of home forever. The wind screamed like it had teeth. Pines bowed. Snow spun across the private drive leading to Silas Crown's mansion, an elegant fortress built to keep the world out and the silence in. Inside, everything was clean. Too clean. A low fire fought the cold, but couldn't win. Silas sat in his study with a half-finished bourbon that tasted like nothing. Reports stacked high numbers he hadn't opened, victories he didn't feel. He'd built an empire out of code and grit, then sealed himself inside it like a museum exhibit. A man can buy warmth. He can't buy being warm. He stared at the window where the storm erased the horizon. Somewhere out there, people were laughing, fighting, living. In here, only the clock and the fire's tired crackle. Then came a sound. Soft. Wrong. Not wind. Not wood. 3 uneven taps. Silas didn't move at first. He waited for the storm to swallow it. Again, 3 taps, small, uncertain, desperate. His hand paused on the doorknob like the mansion itself didn't want him to open it. But something older than logic pulled him forward. He opened the door. The blizzard lunged inside, and with it stepped a child wrapped in a torn blanket. The cold punched Silas in the face. Snow slammed sideways. And there she was, Juniper Vale, 7 years old, standing on his front steps, like a question the universe refused to answer. Her lips were blue. Her hair was knotted with ice. The blanket around her was thin and frayed, the kind of fabric that belonged to poverty, not winter. Her knees trembled and her eyes, those eyes, held the strange calm of a child who'd spent too long pretending not to be scared. She looked up at him, voice barely there. I don't want to die out here." The words cut clean through Silas's chest. Not dramatic, not loud, just true. He dropped to one knee in the snow coat, instantly soaked at the edges. "Hey," he said, soft enough not to frighten her. "You're not dying tonight. You're safe now." The child swayed like a candle in wind. Silas moved before she fell, lifting her carefully. She weighed almost nothing, too light, like hunger had stolen the heaviness from her bones. Snow melted on his shoulders as he carried her inside. He shut the door against the storm, but the cold came with her, living in her skin, in her shaking hands, in the way she clung to his sleeve like it was the last stable thing on earth. Silas Crown, who feared no boardroom, felt something unfamiliar rise in his throat. Fear, not of losing, of caring. Silas laid Juniper on the couch near the fire. The flames painted her face gold, but her fingers stayed stiff. She watched the room like she expected it to vanish, like warmth was a trick. He brought towels, warm water, a blanket thick enough to matter. He worked carefully, slow and respectful, not touching more than necessary, keeping his voice calm because she was a child, and the world had already been too rough. "What's your name?" he asked. She swallowed. "Juniper." "Junie." "Junie," he repeated like he wanted the syllables to be real. "I'm Silas. You're safe here." Her eyes flicked to the tall ceilings, the glass walls, the expensive silence. She looked like she didn't know where to put her fear. It didn't fit anywhere. He rubbed warmth into her hands. She flinched at first, then slowly relaxed as if her body was learning that kindness didn't always demand a price. "Where's your family?" Silas asked gently. Junie's gaze dropped to the blanket. "My mom. She told me to wait by the road. She said she'd find help. But she didn't come back." The storm groaned outside as if it understood. "How long were you out there?" he asked. Junie blinked hard, since before it got dark. Silas's jaw tightened. The blizzard had started over 12 hours ago. Junie whispered, "Please, don't let it be dark again." Silas tucked the blanket tighter, like he could stitch safety into the fabric. "I won't," he said. And suddenly he realized he meant it. Morning arrived without sunlight, just a paler shade of gray. The world outside was buried roads erased under white. Silas made breakfast, like he was following instinct, not habit. Eggs, toast, warm milk. Junie ate slowly, gripping the fork awkwardly, like she hadn't had one in a while. Between bites, her eyes kept sliding toward the door. "You said my mom would come," she murmured. Silas set down his coffee. His throat felt tight. "We'll find her, Junie, I promise. A promise is easy to say, hard to carry." He pulled on boots and a heavy coat, avoided using the word storm, like it might scare her into remembering the cold. "I'm going to check the road, see if anyone's looking." Her eyes widened. "You're leaving?" Silas crouched to her level. "Just a few minutes." She didn't believe the words, but she nodded because she wanted to. Silas hesitated, then unbuckled his watch and placed it in her hands. "See this, when the big hand gets to here, I'll be back." Junie held it like treasure, like time itself. Outside, snow crunched beneath Silas's steps. The path from last night was nearly gone, swallowed by fresh powder. He drove down the private road, headlights cutting through fog. At a bend near the woods, he stopped. Something faint, smaller footprints, half buried, leading toward a frozen creek. Silas followed until the tracks dissolved into white. A red scarf snagged in branches. Thin, cheap, stiff with ice. A child's mitten was stuck to it like a final clue. Silas stood there alone in the storm, holding proof that the night had been worse than he'd wanted to admit. Then he turned back, because a little girl was waiting with his watch. When Silas returned, Junie was by the door, too still, like she'd spent the whole time rehearsing panic. Her face lit up when she saw him. Then she saw the scarf. The light faded. "Is that hers?" she asked. Silas didn't lie. He didn't confirm either. He chose the safest truth. It might be. Junie's hands tightened around his watch. "Can we go find her now?" Silas knelt, meeting her eyes. "The snow's too deep right now. But I'm calling people who know how to search safely." He called the authorities. Reported a missing woman, possible exposure, possible creek area. He gave locations, landmarks, everything, because this wasn't a problem money could solve alone. This was time and weather and life. Detective Rowan Pike answered with a voice like gravel and patience. He promised search teams as soon as roads cleared. Hours passed. Junie sat by the fire, hugging the watch, listening for news like listening could summon it. Silas made hot cocoa, set a mug in her small hands. "My mom always used marshmallows," Junie said quietly. Silas managed a faint smile. "Next time, marshmallows." Junie looked at him, too wise for 7. "You sound like you don't know if she'll be okay." Silas stared at the flames. "Sometimes hoping is all we can do." Junie slid closer, resting her small hand on his arm. "My mom says hope makes people warm." Silas swallowed hard, because for the first time in years he felt warmth and it scared him. The mansion should have felt safe. But the night made it feel like a waiting room for grief. Junie fell asleep on the couch, curled under the blanket. The watch was clutched to her chest. Silas stayed awake, staring at the scarf on the table like it was a verdict. He thought about footprints, the creek, the way Junie had said she didn't want the dark again. He thought about his own childhood, too little warmth, too much pride. About the way he'd promised himself nobody would ever be able to hurt him again. Then built a life where nobody could reach him at all. The phone rang just before midnight. Silas's heart kicked hard once, then held its breath. A rescue worker's voice crackled through static. "Mr. Crown, we found a woman near the creek. Unconscious. She's being transported to Aspen Valley Hospital now." Relief and dread collided in Silas's chest. "Is she alive?" barely the worker said. "But yes." Silas pressed his forehead to the window, eyes closing. Snow fell softer now, like the storm was tired of being cruel. He looked at Uni sleeping peacefully. How do you tell a child that alive can still mean not safe? Silas sat beside her and brushed hair from her face with the gentlest touch. You're safe, Junie, he whispered. I'll take care of you until she can. He didn't realize those words were becoming something bigger than comfort. They were becoming a vow. Morning arrived pale and fragile. The sky cleared enough for roads to open just barely. Silas bundled Junie in a thick coat and scarf. He didn't mention danger. He kept his voice steady. We're going to see your mom. Junie pressed her face to the window during the drive, watching snow-coated trees like they were witnesses. At the hospital, everything smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Nurses moved quickly, quietly, people trained to hold crisis without dropping it. Nurse Elena Park met them outside the ICU doors. She looked tired but kind, the way a candle looks in a storm. You're Mr. Crown, yes, Silas said. And this is Junie. Elena lowered her voice. Severe hypothermia and dehydration. She's stable but weak. You can go in briefly. Silas looked down. Be brave, okay? Junie nodded, too small for the size of this moment. She grabbed his hand so tight it hurt. Inside, machines beeped softly beside a bed. A woman lay there. Marinvale skin, pale lips, cracked hair tangled like the storm had tried to keep her. Junie stopped at the foot of the bed. Her eyes searched for something familiar. Mom, she whispered. Marin didn't move at first. Silas held his breath. Then Marin stirred just enough. Her eyelids fluttered. Her gaze found Junie. A weak smile appeared like sunrise through clouds. Junie Marin breathed. Junie broke tears, spilling as she leaned forward. Mom Silas stepped back, giving them space chest heavy with a feeling he hadn't had in years, reverence. For love that survives the cold. Doctors guided Junie out after a few minutes. She needs rest, they said gently. We're doing everything we can. In the hallway, Junie looked up at Silas, cheeks wet but calm in a way that shattered him. She smiled, Junie whispered. She knew I was there. Silas nodded. She did. He spoke with a doctor, careful words, cautious expectations. Lung damage, risk of complications. The next days are critical. Silas didn't tell Junie the details. Child-safe truth only. They're helping her get stronger. That evening, they returned to the mansion. The study fire burned low again, but it didn't feel empty now. Junie sat on the couch holding the same blanket from the first night. She looked small against the giant room. Mr. Crown, she asked softly. Yeah, why did you help me? Silas took a long breath, honesty but gentle. Because someone once helped me when I was in trouble, and I forgot what it felt like until you knocked. Junie stared at him, then at the flames. You make the house feel warm. Silas didn't know how to answer that, because the truth was, she did. Later, Silas found Junie asleep with her hand curled around his watch again, like time was the only thing she trusted. Silas stood by the fire and listened to the mansion breathe, and he realized the scariest part wasn't the storm outside. It was the storm inside him, the one that started melting. The next morning, the hospital called. Silas heard it in the pause before the words, in the way the nurse exhaled. He drove immediately. Junie sat beside him, quiet, staring forward like she was trying to hold the day together with her mind. At the hospital, the doctor met them. His face said it before his mouth did. I'm so sorry, he whispered. She didn't make it. Junie's fingers slipped from Silas's hand. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just stood there frozen like her body had decided movement was too dangerous. She's gone, Junie asked. Silas knelt, heart splitting. Yes, sweetheart. The words didn't land like a sentence. They landed like a door closing forever. Junie buried her face in his coat and cried without sound. No dramatic sobs. Just the kind of grief that steals oxygen. Silas held her tightly, careful not to crush. Careful not to let go. His eyes burned. Outside the hospital window, snow drifted down again, soft and endless. Silas whispered, mostly to himself, "You won't be alone." He didn't say "I promise" out loud, because promises had already failed her once. So he made something stronger, a decision. The funeral was small, quiet, the kind of ceremony poverty makes when there's no time to be grand about sorrow. Junie wore a borrowed coat. She held a stuffed bear the hospital staff had given her, squeezing it like it could stop the world from leaving again. Silas stood behind her like a wall, silent, protective, unsure how to hold pain without trying to solve it. Afterward, the mansion felt too large, too bright, too expensive for the weight in the air. Junie sat on the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring at the fireplace like it held answers. "I miss her," she said finally. Silas sat beside her. "I know. She said she'd come back," Junie whispered. "I waited." Silas swallowed. "She loved you. She tried to get help." Junie's eyes lifted, glassy. "Then why did she have to die? There are questions adults can't survive either." Silas didn't lie. He chose truth with tenderness. Sometimes people fight as hard as they can, and life still isn't fair. Junie leaned into him, head resting against his chest. Silas stayed still, letting her use him as an anchor. Because he was learning something. You can't always save the past, but you can protect what's in front of you. That night, Silas stared at the scarf on the table and finally understood. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was responsibility. Days began to form a rhythm, slow and shaky like new legs learning to walk. Junie followed Silas through the mansion, curious about everything. She asked why the ceilings were so high, why the kitchen had 2 ovens, why the photos on the wall never showed him smiling. Silas didn't know how to explain loneliness to a child, so he didn't dress it up. "Because no one was there with me," he said. Junie thought about that like it was a puzzle. Then she held up a crayon drawing she'd made at the dining table, a stick figure girl, a tall figure, and a big yellow sun. "This is us," she said. Silas felt something twist in his chest, tight, bright, dangerous. Outside, the snow began to melt in thin sheets sliding off the roof. "Spring's coming," Silas said. Junie watched the drip, drip, drip like it was a story. "Mom used to say snow hides the sad things," she murmured. "But when it melts, you can see what's real again." Silas looked at her, stunned by the wisdom in such a small voice. That night, Junie stood in the doorway of his study wearing one of his oversized sweaters like armor. "Can I stay in here tonight?" she asked. Silas closed his laptop. "Of course," he said, and meant it like a homecoming. A social worker arrived a few weeks later. Tessa Wren, calm, professional, child first. She didn't smile for show. She smiled when she meant it. She asked the questions that mattered. Do you have family support? Do you understand trauma and grief in children? Do you have a plan for school counseling stability? Are you prepared for attachment and fear responses? Silas didn't get offended. He didn't throw money at it. He listened, because Junie wasn't a charity project. She was a child, and children deserve adults who don't treat them like temporary. "I want her safe," Silas said. "Long term." Tessa studied him for a long moment. "Wanting isn't the same as doing." Silas nodded. "Then tell me what doing looks like." That answer changed the air. They talked about routines, boundaries, therapy, community. Silas agreed to everything that served Junie's well-being. He signed paperwork with a steady hand, no hesitation, no bargaining. When Tessa left, Junie peered around the corner. "Am I in trouble?" Silas crouched to her level. "No, kiddo. They just want to make sure you're protected," Junie whispered. "Like you." Silas's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said, "like me. Grief doesn't leave politely. It comes back at night." Junie woke up crying, quiet at first, then shaking like the storm had returned inside her body. Silas rushed in, keeping the lights low, voice gentle. "Hey, I'm here," he said. Junie's eyes were wide, terrified. It was dark again, she whispered, and I couldn't find her. Silas sat beside her bed, not too close, letting her choose. Do you want a glass of water? Or do you want to sit with me? She crawled into his lap like she'd been holding herself together too long. I thought you'd leave, she said. Silas exhaled slowly. I'm not leaving. Junie shook her head, tears falling. People say that. Silas didn't argue. He didn't say trust me like trust was easy. Instead, he did something simple. He opened his phone, turned off notifications, and set it on the dresser. Then he took his watch, now repaired with a new band, and placed it in her hand. You can keep time, he said, and you can keep me honest. Junie stared at him, breathing slowing. Silas added quietly, if you wake up scared, you don't have to be brave alone. Junie pressed her forehead to his chest. For the first time since her mother died, she slept again, not because the world was safe, but because someone stayed. Detective Rowan Pike visited with a file. He didn't bring drama. He brought closure. They sat at the kitchen table while Junie drew nearby within earshot, but not forced into adult conversation. Rowan spoke carefully. We confirmed what we could. Your mother went for help. She wasn't abandoning her child. Silas nodded, relief heavy. Junie didn't need to carry blame. Rowan added, there may be extended relatives, but nothing stable surfaced. You've already started the guardianship process. If you continue, we'll support it. Silas glanced at Junie's small shoulders, big focus on her crayons, like art could hold the world in place. Rowan's voice softened. Kids like her don't need saving once. They need safety every day. Silas swallowed. I'm learning. Junie looked up suddenly as if she'd caught something important. Are you the police? Rowan smiled gently. Yeah, I'm the guy who makes sure people do the right thing. Junie studied him. Is my mom convinced I tried? Rowan paused, then chose words that were honest and child-safe. Your mom knew you waited like she asked. She knew you were strong. Junie's eyes filled. She nodded once, small, fierce. Then she went back to drawing, but her hand didn't shake as much. Silas watched and realized sometimes justice is just the truth spoken aloud. The snow melted faster. The mansion stopped sounding like an echo. Junie chased the housekeeper's cat through the hallway, giggling. Silas tried to look annoyed, failed. The sound of laughter landed in him like sunlight. He found her in the kitchen, standing on a stool, stirring pancake batter with the seriousness of a scientist. My mom let me flip them, Junie announced. Silas raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. Junie grinned. But fun. They compromised, Silas flipped. Junie sprinkled chocolate chips like confetti. Later, Junie stood by the back door looking at the garden still buried under shrinking snow. Mr. Crown, she asked. Yeah, can we plant flowers when it's warm? Silas smiled. As many as you want. Junie nodded thoughtfully. Then my mom can see them from heaven. She liked yellow ones. Silas's throat tightened. He crouched beside her. Then yellow it is. Junie slipped her hand into his like it belonged there. You promise you won't ever leave? Silas looked at her and saw the fear still living behind her eyes, a fear no child should have. He didn't make a big speech. He just said steady and true, I promise. You're home. Junie's smile bloomed real this time, and the mansion for the first time felt like it had a heartbeat. The first time Silas Crown took Junie beyond the iron gate, it felt like stepping out of a sealed glass aquarium and into the ocean. The driveway was still lined with snowbanks, but the air had shifted. The storm's anger had broken. Aspen's streets were quiet in that post-blizzard way, sunlight glinting on ice like the world had been polished and made innocent again. Silas hated how deceptive that innocence was. He drove with both hands locked on the wheel, glancing at the passenger seat every few seconds. Junie sat bundled in a puffy coat that still looked too big for her, her small legs swinging above the floor mat. She kept her gaze on the window, watching the town drift by like a story she didn't fully trust. "Where are we going?" she asked. Voice soft, careful. "Somewhere warm," Silas said. "Somewhere simple." He didn't say somewhere normal, because Uni had learned what normal could do, how fast it could vanish. He chose a small bookstore cafe near the center of town. Not flashy, not crowded. A place that smelled like cinnamon and paper, where people spoke in low voices, where the lights were soft enough to feel kind. He parked far from the entrance so they could walk without being watched from someone's phone camera lens. But even before they opened the door, Silas felt eyes on him. He always did. It came with the name, the face, the life he'd built. People looked at him like he was a headline with legs. The billionaire, the recluse, the man who bought silence the way other people bought coffee. Now he had a child at his side, and the world had opinions about that before it even knew the truth. Inside, the cafe's warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. Junie hesitated at the threshold, as if she expected the room to reject her. Silas didn't rush her. He just kept the door open, standing between her and the cold. "You're okay," he murmured. Junie nodded once and stepped in. They chose a table by the window, one where Junie could see outside, where she wouldn't feel trapped. Silas ordered hot chocolate, and when the cashier asked if he wanted marshmallows, he didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, and glanced at Junie. "Extra." Junie's lips twitched, almost a smile. Almost. When the drinks arrived, she wrapped both hands around the mug as if it contained more than heat. As if it contained permission. She took one careful sip. The marshmallow stuck to her upper lip. She froze, embarrassed, until Silas gently pointed to his own lip like a secret code. "There," he said. Junie wiped it and let out a tiny laugh so small it could have been mistaken for a breath. But Silas heard it like thunder. Then the whispering started. Not loud, not cruel, just present. People turning their heads. Phones angled a little too carefully. A woman at the next table recognized him, then recognized Junie, and their curiosity sharpened into something uncomfortable. Silas felt the old instinct surge control the room. Shut it down. Make one call and erase the problem. But Junie was watching him. Her eyes flicked toward the whisperers, then back to him. "Are they mad at us?" Silas leaned closer, lowering his voice. "No. People are just curious. Sometimes they don't know how to be quiet about it." Junie stared at the cocoa. "I don't like when people look at me like that." Silas's chest tightened. He recognized that feeling too well, except he'd been looked at with envy. Junie had been looked at with pity. "I don't like it either," he admitted. "So we'll do this the safe way. We keep it calm. We leave if you want." Junie nodded, then whispered, "Can we stay a little?" Silas's throat burned. "As long as you're comfortable." A teenager walked by and muttered under his breath, not caring if Silas heard, probably just a publicity stunt. Silas's jaw clenched so hard it ached. The old Silas would have crushed that kid with a glance, a lawsuit, a security escort. The old Silas believed power meant you never let disrespect stand. The new Silas looked at Junie's hands, small, steadying on the mug, and realized something brutal. This wasn't about him. He kept his voice calm. He signaled the cafe manager, quietly asked for discretion, asked for space. No scene, no confrontation, just protection. When the manager nodded, Silas exhaled. Junie tilted her head. "You're not mad," Silas swallowed. "I'm protective." Junie's eyes softened, suddenly far away. "My mom was like that." Silas didn't answer immediately. He didn't replace Marin in the sentence. He didn't compete with a ghost. He just said quietly, "Then I'm honored." They finished their cocoa. They wandered the bookstore aisles. Junie traced her fingers along spines, choosing a children's book about gardens and bright yellow flowers. She held it to her chest like treasure. At the checkout, she hesitated. "Can we Really plant them? Silas nodded. We'll plant them, and they'll come back every season. Junie stared at him, the question behind her eyes louder than her voice. Do people come back? Silas didn't lie. He didn't promise impossible things. He promised what he could give. I'm here, he said, every day. And for the first time since the storm, Junie's shoulders lowered just a fraction, as if her body was learning what safety felt like in daylight. The courthouse wasn't dramatic. No marble grandeur, no cinematic gavel slams. Just fluorescent lights, beige walls, and a process designed for one purpose: to keep children safe. Silas respected that. He wore a simple suit, no designer flash, no sharp billionaire armor. He didn't need to look powerful. He needed to look stable. He needed to look like someone a child could lean on without falling. Junie sat beside him on a bench with her feet not touching the floor. She wore a neat dress and a soft cardigan, hair brushed carefully back. Not fancy, just cared for. She clutched her stuffed bear under one arm and Silas's watch in the other hand, like a double anchor, comfort and time. Social worker Tessa Wren arrived with a folder. Detective Rowan Pike nodded politely from across the hallway. A child advocate introduced herself to Junie first, not Silas, because in this building, the child wasn't a side character. Silas watched the advocate kneel to Junie's level, speak gently, ask simple questions. Did she feel safe? Did she have nightmares? Did she know she could say no to anything that made her uncomfortable? Did she understand no one was angry at her? Junie answered quietly, glancing at Silas only when she needed reassurance. Silas didn't interrupt. He didn't coach. He didn't perform. He sat still and let the system do its job, because a system that protected children was a system worth respecting, even when it asked him to prove himself. When they were called into the room, Junie's small hand slid into Silas's like it had become habit. The judge's eyes were alert, tired, human. The kind of eyes that had seen too many children fail to be protected by adults who swore they'd be different. The judge looked at Silas. Mr. Crown, you understand what guardianship means? Yes, Silas said. This is not temporary. It's not a rescue weekend. It's not charity. The judge's voice sharpened slightly. It's responsibility. It's permanence. Silas held the gaze steady. I understand. The judge turned to the advocate. The advocate described Junie's circumstances carefully, respectfully, without sensationalizing her loss. She spoke of the storm, the rescue, the hospital. The passing of Junie's mother, stated plainly in a way that honored the truth, without turning it into spectacle. Then the judge addressed Junie directly. Juniper, the judge said, softening. Can you tell me how you feel about living with Mr. Crown? Junie's fingers tightened around Silas's hand. She looked at the judge, then down at her bear, then up again, like she was gathering courage from the air. Silas didn't nod, didn't push, didn't signal. He just stayed. Junie swallowed. I want to stay with him, she said. The room quieted. The judge asked why. Junie's voice trembled, but her words were clear. Because he stayed when it was dark, and he didn't get mad when I cried. And he makes me cocoa with marshmallows. A tiny, gentle ripple of emotion moved through the room. Not laughter, something softer. Something like relief. The judge looked back to Silas. Do you have a plan for her schooling? Yes, Silas said. A local school with support services, and counseling, trauma-informed, and healthcare, yes, and community friends, safe adults, besides you, the judge pressed. Silas nodded. Yes, I understand she needs more than one person. She needs a network. Tessa Wren's eyes lifted slightly, approving in that quiet way professionals have when they hear the right thing. The judge paused, then delivered the question that mattered most, Mr. Crown. Why are you doing this? Silas's throat tightened. He could have said, because I can. Because I have resources. Because I rescued her. But that would have made Junie sound like a project. He chose the truth. Because she shouldn't be alone, Silas said. And because I won't treat her grief like something to manage. I'll treat it like something to honor with stability, with patience, and with time. The judge watched him for a long moment, weighing him the way a storm weighs a branch. Then paperwork, ink, signatures. No applause, no music, just an official line crossing from one life into another. When it was done, the judge looked at Junie gently. "You're protected, Juniper." Junie blinked, absorbing the word like it was unfamiliar. Outside the courtroom, Junie stopped in the hallway and looked up at Silas. "Does this mean—" Her voice wavered. "I'm not temporary." Silas knelt careful and calm. "You are not temporary," he said. "You're not a visitor. You're not a problem. You're my responsibility and my family." Junie's breath hitched. Then slowly she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. Silas held her carefully, one hand steady at her back, the other shielding her from the stares of a world that didn't understand the difference between a headline and a home. And in that plain hallway, under boring fluorescent lights, something sacred happened. A child stopped waiting. Spring didn't arrive like a celebration. It arrived like a decision. One day the snow stopped biting, the air softened. Water began to drip from the roof in steady rhythms. The world started letting go. Silas stood at the back door holding 2 pairs of gardening gloves, one adult-sized one, comically small. Junie bounced on her toes, eyes bright, cheeks pink from excitement. "Are we really doing it today?" she asked. Silas nodded. "Today." They stepped into the garden where the earth was dark and damp, still cold underneath, but alive. The yard behind the mansion had always been landscaped, perfectly trimmed hedges, decorative stone beauty designed to impress. Now it was going to be messy. Junie didn't mind messy. Junie trusted messy more than perfect. Silas handed her the small gloves. They swallowed her fingers. She wiggled them and giggled. "This is like bare hands," she said. Silas smiled. "Bare hands are good for planting." They knelt near a patch of soil where snow had finally receded. Silas loosened the earth with a small shovel while Junie held the seed packet like it was a letter addressed to the future. Yellow marigolds. Junie pressed the seeds into the soil one by one with careful seriousness. Not hurried. Not playful. Like the act itself mattered. "My mom used to plant flowers in cups," Junie said softly. "We didn't have a yard. She said if you can grow something you can believe in tomorrow." Silas swallowed. "Your mom was wise." Junie nodded without looking up. She was tired too. Silas didn't ask for details. He didn't dig into pain like it was a story to harvest. He simply stayed with her in the moment, letting the garden become a safe place to remember. When Junie finished a row, she sat back on her heels and studied the soil. "Will they grow even if I'm sad?" she asked. Silas answered carefully. "Yes, and when they bloom, you don't have to pretend you aren't sad. You can be both sad and still growing." Junie stared at him like she was deciding if that could be true. Then she scooted closer and leaned her shoulder against his arm. They planted more seeds until the packet was empty. After Silas brought out a small whiteboard and placed it on the kitchen counter like a treaty table. "We're making house rules," he said. Junie's eyes widened. "Like school rules, better," Silas said. "These are our rules." Junie climbed onto a stool and held a marker with both hands. "Okay." Silas spoke slowly, giving her space to agree or disagree. Rule 1. No secrets about safety. If something scares you, you tell me. If something confuses you, you tell me. Junie wrote it in big, uneven letters. Silas continued. Rule 2. Feelings are allowed. You can cry, you can be angry, you can miss your mom. You don't have to hide it. Junie paused with the marker mid-air. Even if it's a lot, Silas nodded. Even if it's a lot. Rule 3. If you have a bad dream, you can knock on my door anytime. Junie's mouth tightened. Sometimes I wake up and my heart goes fast. Silas kept his voice steady. Then you knock. and I'll be there. Rule 4, if I'm stressed, I don't disappear into work. I say it out loud and take a break. Junie squinted. You promise? Silas exhaled. Yes, you can hold me to it. Then he added the rule that made Junie's eyes sparkle. Rule 5, marshmallows are mandatory. Junie burst into a laugh, clear bright, the kind of sound that made the kitchen feel like it had sunlight inside it, even without windows. That's the best rule, she declared. Silas smiled, then glanced toward the framed hallway photos, his old life frozen in glossy rectangles. He saw the man he used to be, sharp edges, empty eyes. Junie hopped down from the stool and walked to him with that serious child bravery again. Mr. Crow Silas, she corrected herself, testing the intimacy like a bridge. Am I safe now? Silas didn't promise a perfect world. He didn't promise no more pain. He didn't promise that grief wouldn't return at night. He promised what mattered. You're safe with me, he said, and I'll keep building safety around you every day. Junie stared for a long second, then nodded like she was choosing to believe. She reached out and took his watch from her pocket, the same one that had measured the first promise during the storm, and slipped it gently onto his wrist. So you remember, she said. So you come back. Silas's throat tightened hard. He covered her small hand with his. I'll come back, he said. Every time. Outside the garden waited quiet soil holding yellow futures beneath the surface, and inside the mansion, once a cold monument to solitude, was learning something new, how to be a home. The storm returned without warning. Not the violent kind that shattered trees or buried roads, but the quieter one, the kind that crept in at night, tapping softly on the windows, reminding everyone that winter never truly vanished. It only waited. Silas Crown was in his study laptop, open numbers glowing on the screen like a language he once trusted more than people. Outside rain mixed with sleet rattling the glass. He hadn't noticed how late it was until the house made a sound. A knock, 3 soft taps. Not on the front door. On his study door. Silas's chest tightened instantly. He stood and opened it. Juniper stood there in socks, hair mussed with sleep, clutching the familiar watch in her hand. Her face was pale, eyes wide, not panicked, but fragile like a glass held too close to the edge of a table. The big hand, she whispered. It's past the line. Silas didn't ask questions. He didn't say it's just a dream. He stepped aside. Come in. Junie padded into the room, climbing onto the couch she had claimed as hers on hard nights. She curled under the blanket without being asked, her body small against the weight of the furniture, the world. Silas sat beside her, close enough to matter, far enough to let her breathe. It was dark again, Junie said quietly, and I couldn't find her. Silas felt the old ache rise, the helplessness of knowing no sentence could fix what grief broke. He didn't rush to fill the silence. I kept waiting, she continued. Like before. And I thought, maybe if I waited long enough, she'd come back. Silas stared at the fire, watching the flames bend and recover. Waiting can feel safer than moving, he said gently. Especially when moving once hurt you. Junie nodded. I was scared you'd leave too. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Silas turned to face her fully. I'm here, he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just true. Junie studied his face like she was checking for cracks. You don't get mad when I'm sad. Silas exhaled. Sad doesn't scare me. Disappearing does. Junie's fingers twisted in the blanket. Sometimes I feel okay. And then I feel bad for feeling okay. Silas felt something break open inside him. That's normal, he said. Feeling better doesn't mean you loved her less. Junie swallowed hard. I don't want to forget her. You won't, Silas said. We don't forget people we love. We carry them differently. Outside, the sleet softened into rain. The house creaked, not ominous now, just alive. Junie yawned, eyelids fluttering. She pressed the watch into Silas's palm. Can you keep it tonight? Silas closed his fingers around it. I will. Junie's breathing slowed. She drifted to sleep with her head against the cushion, trusting the room, trusting him. Silas stayed awake longer than he needed to, not because of work, because of awe. The storm had come back, but this time no one was alone. Morning broke gently, like the world was trying not to startle anyone. Sunlight filtered through the trees, catching on melting droplets that fell from branches in slow, patient rhythms. The ground was soft with yesterday's rain, the air smelling like earth and something new. Junie woke early and found Silas already awake, standing in the hallway with his phone in hand. Are you working? She asked cautiously. Silas shook his head. I'm taking a picture. She frowned. Of what? Silas turned the phone around. Of them. Junie in an oversized sweater, hair still half sleepy. Silas beside her, no suit, no armor, just a man who hadn't slept much and didn't regret it. Junie squinted. You look weird. Silas smiled. Good weird or bad weird? Good weird, she decided. But you're not smiling right. She stepped closer, examining him critically, then poked his cheek with one finger. Like this. Softer. Silas tried again. Junie nodded, satisfied. That's a real one. The camera clicked. Later they stood in the garden. The marigold seeds they'd planted hadn't sprouted yet, but the soil was darker now, richer, ready. Junie crouched near the patch like she expected flowers to rise on command. They're taking their time, she said. Silas nodded. Good things usually do. Junie glanced up. Do you think my mom would like it here? Silas answered without thinking. Yes. Junie smiled faintly. Then that's enough. Inside, Silas removed several old framed photos from the hallway business events, stiff smiles, moments that looked successful but felt hollow. He replaced them with the new photo. Junie watched him hang it carefully. Now your house has a happy picture, she said. Silas stepped back, studying it. So do I. That afternoon, with guidance from her counselor, Junie wrote a letter. Short sentences, uneven spelling, honest words. Hi, Mom. I'm safe. I have my own room, delicious food, and cocoa, too. I miss you. I'm trying. They folded the letter together. Silas didn't read it. It wasn't his to carry. They placed it beneath the soil near the marigolds like a secret meant for roots. Junie brushed dirt from her hands and looked up at him. Is it okay if I'm happy today? Silas knelt to her level. Yes. And it'll be okay if tomorrow is hard again. She considered that. Will you still stay? Silas didn't hesitate. Yes. Junie nodded, accepting the answer like a stone set into place. That evening, laughter filled the kitchen as they burned dinner slightly and pretended it was intentional. Silas realized something startling. The mansion no longer echoed. It answered back. The last traces of winter disappeared without ceremony. No thunder, no dramatic sunrise, just quiet ground where snow had been damp earth breathing again. The long driveway beyond the mansion lay clear for the first time in months, stretching toward the hills like an open question. Juniper stood at the front door, her shoes neatly tied, her jacket zipped only halfway. She wasn't cold, not anymore. Still, she lingered there, fingers resting lightly against the glass, as if touching a memory. Silas Crown watched her from a distance, careful not to rush the moment. You don't have to go out if you don't want to, he said gently. Junie shook her head. I do. They stepped outside together. The air was cool but kind, carrying the scent of wet grass and pine. Birds tested the morning with uncertain songs. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped steadily from a roof, counting time in soft taps. Junie took a few steps down the driveway, then stopped. This is where I was, she said quietly. Silas didn't ask which night. He knew. She turned back toward the house, then toward him. Her face held no panic now, only seriousness. I thought no one would open the door. Silas felt the weight of that sentence settle into his chest. I almost didn't, he admitted. I was afraid it was nothing. Or that I was imagining it. Junie nodded, absorbing that honesty. I knocked again. Silas knelt so they were eye level. I'm glad you did. They walked a little farther, not because they needed to leave, but because they could. Because the road no longer meant waiting. It was just a road now. Junie leaned closer to him, her shoulder brushing his arm. It doesn't feel scary anymore. Silas followed her gaze to the garden. Small green shoots had broken through the soil where the marigolds were planted, tiny, determined, alive. They're coming, Junie whispered, almost like she was afraid to scare them. Yes, Silas said. They are. She crouched carefully, keeping her hands back. Mom would have liked that. Silas nodded. I think she would have loved it. Junie stood and looked at him for a long moment. There was something new in her eyes, not fear, not even sadness. It was certainty. You're really staying, she said. It wasn't a question. Silas didn't answer quickly. He wanted the words to land exactly where they belonged. I'm staying, he said. And not because you need saving, because this is where I choose to be. Junie studied him one last time, then nodded, satisfied. She slipped her hand into his, warm and sure. They turned back toward the house. The mansion no longer felt like stone and glass. It felt lived in. The windows reflected sunlight instead of isolation. The door stood open not as an invitation to the world, but as proof that something had changed inside. As they stepped over the threshold, Junie paused. I used to think being safe meant not being alone, she said softly. Now I think it means someone stays when it's hard. Silas closed the door behind them gently. Yes, he said. That's exactly what it means. Later that day, Silas hung one final photo in the hallway. No frame of power, no staged success. Just a simple image, a man and a child in a garden, dirt on their hands, sunlight on their faces. Junie looked at it and smiled. That's us, she said. Silas nodded. That's home. As evening settled in the house, filled with small sounds, footsteps, laughter, the clink of dishes, ordinary sounds, miraculous ones. Outside, winter was gone. Inside, something deeper had finally thawed. Silas Crown had spent his life believing control was the same as strength. That distance was safety. That staying detached meant staying intact. He had been wrong. Strength was opening the door. Safety was choosing presence. And staying when it mattered most was love. Junie curled up on the couch with a book, her feet tucked beneath her. She looked up once more. It's not cold anymore, she said. Silas smiled, feeling the truth settle into him. No, he replied softly. It's not. And for the first time in his life, he knew he wasn't waiting for anything else. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Junie squeezed his hand once, smiling up at him with quiet confidence. I'm home, she said. Silas nodded, and so was he. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.